So, I'm a former speech and debater. I was integral to the founding of my team in high school, and I was captain for 3 years before I graduated. Something people always say when I mention that I did speech and debate is that I must be good at debating people. And the problem with this idea is that a normal person has about the same understanding of what debate as a sport is as I do. Enter Ben Shapiro, the boil on the collective ass of the internet and one of the worst debaters ever. So let's talk about it. Ben Shapiro was born on January 15, 1984 in Los Angeles, California. He skipped the 3rd and 9th grade and graduated from high school in 2000 at the age of 16. He went on to graduate from UCLA at 2004 at the age of 20, with a BA in political science. He then went on to Harvard Law School and graduated in 2007 with a doctorate of law. He worked at the offices of Goodwin Procter and then quit after less than a year and started his own legal consultation firm. His first book was published in 2004, titled Brainwashed: How Universities Indoctrinate America's Youth, where he posited that progressivism in universities is promoted more than conservatism and that professors are inherently intolerant of conservatives. He then published 10 more books, but I don't really give a shit about them, so we're not going to talk about it. In 2012, he was the editor-at-large at Breitbart, a notable anti-Semitic discussion board, and then in 2016 he resigned because he allegedly felt the organization failed to support one of their reporters after being assaulted by a former campaign manager of Donald Trump. In 2015, he found the Daily Wire, financed with $15 million from Ferris and Dan Wilkes, who make their money through oil fracking. Technically, the Daily Wire is a project of Bent Key Ventures, which is only managed by one brother, but I dig. On a day ending in Y, Ben Shapiro hosts his own segment called The Ben Shapiro Show, and began syndicating it for radio broadcasting in 2018. But the reason why he's so popular isn't because his sugar daddies gave him oil money to launch a project with which to artificially stoke culture wars to distract people from things that are actually important. He's popular because he can't stop talking. I remember the first time I had ever seen content featuring Ben Shapiro was in a segment of him speaking at a college campus, which he does frequently. Usually these are accompanied by titles like Ben Shapiro destroys libs or something like that, because when you first watch these clips, that's really what it looks like he's doing. In reality, what he's doing is just zigging when the other person zags, and he's not really providing any meaningful commentary or critique. He's just engaging in being a bad faith actor. So in January of 2023, Ben Shapiro posted a video titled Ben Shapiro's Secrets to Winning Any Argument, where he gives you rules on how to become an insufferable prick, which is what he thinks debating is. The reason why I'm leading into this to talk about why he's a bad faith actor is because these tips he's giving people are not so that a productive discussion can take place. It's just so that you can assert some false sense of intellectual superiority over the other person. The first rule is to ask questions for clarification. He platforms this by asserting that, quote, people speak shorthand with each other, and that means that their words are inherently unclear. But then the example that he gives is when someone says, quote, you're a climate denier, you're denying climate change, and then says that you should follow that up by asking exactly what the term climate denier means, and then go further to say that the other person actually needs to clarify their own views of what progressive policies are being put out to stop the changing of our climate. In Ben's mind, he needs to know the exact context of every single term that the other person is using in order to adequately refute their claims. And the thing is that, yes, having definitions available for both sides of a debate is necessary in order to make sure you both know what you're talking about. But the thing is that Ben doesn't really care about that. You could give him an exact definition of what you assert climate change denier means under the framework of your argument, but then he's just going to move the goalposts and say that you made that definition up, and therefore it can't be used to proceed in discussion no matter the topic. He then shows a clip of himself in a debate with someone who asserts that, quote, every Western nation conducts some form of single-payer healthcare, which proves that it can be done in some form. Then Ben responds by asking what level of healthcare is desired as an outcome of this system and what tax codes will be put in place to make that happen. Then he says that it's the other person's responsibility to clarify exactly which Western country's healthcare they're talking about. But it's important to clarify that the other person hasn't even had a chance to cite any examples yet. They've barely begun introducing their argument. But because this is the point of asking questions in Ben's mind. It's not because you actually want to understand the other. It's because you want to start throwing spike strips out on the road so you can point and laugh when their tires blow out. Ben's second rule is don't accept your opponent's characterization. This is something that I noticed a lot and fell for when I was in debate in high school. It's the idea that when someone critiques an idea you support, that they are criticizing you as an individual personally. When people don't have a good argument, very often what they go to is calling you names. They'll say, you're a bigot, you're a homophobe, you're a hater. Then plays a clip of himself on the Dr. Drew show where he purposefully misgenders Caitlyn Jenner, someone he supposedly respects, and then the other person says he's being disrespectful. And the thing is, he is. he is being disrespectful. The act of intentionally misgendering someone is an act of disrespect. When he purposefully refers to somebody by the wrong pronouns, what he's saying is he doesn't respect this person enough to talk about them as though they are equal to him, which is just malicious. But the thing is, he's presenting it as though the other person calling him disrespectful is unreasonable because he thinks he's not actually doing anything wrong. He asserts that viewing the other person as reasonable is the pathway to failure. He also continually says, they'll call you a bigot, they'll call you a hater, which is not what the other person calls him at all. She just calls him disrespectful. Someone isn't being exact with the articulation of their argument, Ben. It's the I'm not touching you principle of debate. You're getting right up to the line, but then by attributing what you're doing to the other person and saying that they're unfairly calling you names or accusing you of things you aren't doing, they're the instigator, not you. It's preschool shit. His third rule is don't get distracted. He plays a clip of himself talking about an article someone wrote about whether or not you can believe the authenticity of a headline based on whether or not it came from Fox News, which is referred to by the other person as, quote, the Fox News fallacy. Ben says that the reality is that, quote, these things are really being taught in schools, to which the other person asks, do you mean viruses? Ben is immediately stunned speechless for some fucking reason. He presents this as though the other person is being completely unreasonable and asking for clarification for the talking point of these things being taught in schools. Perhaps because Ben doesn't really clarify what these things are. Now, if he wants to claim that there's no context to what he was saying in that clip, we would have no way of knowing, because the clip he plays starts with him talking about the article and saying these things are being taught in schools. Ben then goes on to say that if you're arguing about, quote, same-sex marriage and whether or not men should marry men and whether or not women should marry women and whether that is the moral and utilitarian equivalent of a man marrying a woman, that they immediately shift into what about an old man marrying an old woman, which he then claims is a shift in topic. But the clip he shows the audience is not indicative of what he's claiming. The clip he shows is him introducing the unclear phrasing of these things and the other person asking if he means viruses. Asking for clarification is for instances like this, when Ben is introducing vague language and expecting the other person to intrinsically know what these things means. It is not changing topics. The way he shows a clip before he elaborates on what he's talking about and then says something completely different to what just happened is completely intentional. More on that in a minute. His fourth rule is point out contradictions. He states that they're supposedly, quote, brought about by your opponent's refusal to be clear in their definitions. But didn't you just do that in the previous clip? You just threw out the phrase these things on the table and expected everyone to know what it was. And when you were pressed for clarification, you just flopped. I guess Ben is more of a do as I say, not as I do kind of guy, which would be avoided if he could simply be exact in the articulation of his argument. He says that this allegedly happens all the time and suggests that it's exclusively perpetrated by leftists who will, quote, bring out an argument that is vague and that appears to be internally coherent, but when you actually drill down on the definitions is totally incoherent, and that it is most often seen when discussing gender. He then plays a clip of him asking, quote, what is a woman? A question posed by adult man who has naked photos of minors and thinks women are most fertile for pregnancy and childhood, Matt Walsh. He then stipulates that the person he's asking must not use the word woman. So the other person catches on to this tactic and states that he's using a logical fallacy called a red herring in order to avoid answering the question they asked him. For reference, the red herring logical fallacy is, according to the Oxford Dictionary, something that misleads or distracts from a relevant or important question. And when this person says that he's using a red herring, he just pauses and goes, no, I'm not. Again, using the I'm not touching you principle of debate. Again, he's intentionally presenting a shortened clip with no context as to why this person may have claimed he's using a logical fallacy in order to avoid answering. His fifth rule is perhaps the most hilarious, which is when he says don't get defensive. Crack? Is it crack you smoke, Benjamin? It's crack, isn't it? Ben Shapiro is perhaps the most defensive person I have ever seen. He references his appearance on the BBC and says that the interviewer has bad motivations, and then leaves. You want to know what the actual context of that clip is? Here it is.
In the book you say that there's quite a key phrase, we are so angry at each other right now. But as I say, aren't you part of that anger? Aren't you encouraging that anger? For example, you described Mr. Obama's State of the Union address in 2012 as fascist mentality in action.
Well, I think that if you want to argue with the characterization, then we can talk about what exactly his State of the Union address said. Is it charged language in politics? Sure. The problem that I have is not with charged language in politics, which I'm generally in favor of. I like a robust public debate and a very loud and spirited public debate. I have no problem with that whatsoever. What I'm talking about is the assumption that people with whom we disagree politically are inherently of bad character or, in your words, want to bring us back to the dark ages.
But again, it was your description of the State of the Union address in 2012 as fascist.
The wording of President Trump's 2012 address was bad and wrong.
That's all. There are plenty of things that are bad and wrong, but it doesn't make them fascist.
Well, I suppose that's true. But if you would like to, again, if you'd like to read me the column out loud, I suppose I can critique it for you.
Oh, well, again, with Mr. Obama, you said, and you're Jewish yourself. I only mention that because to put this in context. The Jews who vote for Obama are, by and large, Jews in name only. Ginos, you call them.
My statement was based on the fact that Jews in the United States, as an ethnic group, are largely irreligious, which is true by every single poll. Jews are the most irreligious group in the United States. As an Orthodox Jew who actually takes Judaism seriously, the point that I am making is that most Jews who are ethnically Jewish are not religiously Jewish in any context.
No. The point you were making is that Jews who vote for Obama are Jews in name only.
I said that, yes, that is correct, that Jews who voted for Barack Obama, a progenitor of the Iran deal, a person who was cracking down on religious liberty, a person who spent much of his career as president of the United States attempting to deprive Israel of the necessities to defend itself, that people, Jews who voted for President Obama, by and large, cared about Judaism far less than they did about other priorities.
Did you say they should turn their badge in as a Jew?
Yes, I believe that if you are somebody who takes Judaism seriously, that comes along with ideological commitment.
I mean, I guess.
Also, I hope you're having fun, by the way, going through every old tweet that I've ever sent to try and do gotcha questions. But if you'd like to have a discussion about my general philosophy or things I've done in, say, I don't know, that's 2012, so it's now 2019. If you'd like to discuss something I've done in, say, like the past 5 years, why don't we do that? How about that?
Because your book is a criticism of how angry America is and how America has to do better. And I'm simply
I have an entire list on my website, sir. On my list, I have an entire website of dumb, bad things that I've said. I'm simply trying to point out some of the things you've said that seem to me to help to stoke that anger. For example, you said Israelis like to build, Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. Well, as I say in an article entitled, "Here's a list of all the giant, bad, dumb things I've ever said."
Was that dumb?
What? Yes, that's a dumb tweet. And not only, but it is also important to mention that the next few tweets clarify that that tweet is specifically referring to the Hamas leadership, which, by the way, a BBC I've seen is relatively reticent to condemn.
No, actually, it wasn't. What you went on to do and say, you are correct about the slur on Arabs. It's not all Arabs that want to live in open sewage and blow things up. It's just Palestinians, you went on to say.
It says the ones who take sides against Israel in the Israel-Palestinian conflict.
Population is rotten to the core, you went on to say. Not Hamas, the Palestinian Arab population.
I say that by poll numbers, they elected Hamas. They educate their children in school that Israel should be obliterated, sir.
I guess.
If you want to read, honestly, this is a giant waste of time, in the sense that the entire interview is designed for you to shout slogans or old things that I've said at me. I don't see how this forwards the debate. You talk about undermining the public discourse. It seems to me that simply going through and finding lone things that sound bad out of context and then hitting people with them is a way for you to make a quick buck on BBC off the fact that I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
There are not many bucks to be made on the BBC, unlike American broadcasting, Mr. Shapiro. The point I'm trying to make is that your words are hardly designed to produce the consensus and understanding that the book seems to want to produce. That's my point, that you write about, Judeo-Christian culture and so on, but so much of what you've said in the past would seem to turn its back on Judeo-Christian culture.
You're lecturing me on Judeo-Christian culture after you call the pro-life position barbaric?
I just asked you a question.
And I asked you a question. You failed to answer a single one of mine. Frankly, I find this whole thing a waste of time. If you want to read the book and critique the book, why don't you read and critique the book? If you want to critique me, you can think whatever you want of me.
Why don't you just try and answer the questions?
I don't frankly give a damn what you think of me, since I've never heard of you.
And I've never heard of you until I briefed myself for this. But that's not the issue. You have a new book out, and it's an interesting book. But my point is, your book claims that
Well, it'd be nice if you would quote it from time to time.
Your book is, well, actually, I've done so several times, and I'm about to do so again, if you would let me just finish the question. Your book
frankly, I don't
claims
think
that society
honestly,
is turning its back
sir,
on Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah,
What are those values?
What
are the values it's turning its back on?
I'm not inclined to continue an interview with a person as badly motivated as you as an interviewer. So I think we're done here. I appreciate your time, sir.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time and for showing that anger is not part of American political discourse. Now, Mr. Shapiro, we'll say goodbye.
The minute Andrew Neil asks him if he thinks he's part of the problem, he deflects and says that if people don't want him to say Barack Obama is a fascist, that Barack Obama should be less of a fascist. But Andrew Neil presses him to elaborate on why he thinks this, and then goes on to talk about how Ben Shapiro calls Jewish people who vote for Barack Obama, quote, Jewish in name only, to which Ben Shapiro responds by suggesting that American Jewish people are not real Jewish people by saying that they are, quote, irreligious, which he attributes to polls and statistics that he provides no sources for. And Andrew Neil is like, okay, but that's not what you're saying here. You're saying that if they vote for Barack Obama, that they're not really Jewish, which then backs him into a corner and forces him to admit that, yes, he really did say that, and that they should, quote, turn their badge in, as Andrew Neil quotes from Ben's book, which is literally directly in front of him. But then, before Andrew Neil even has a chance to respond to this, Ben cuts in and very petulantly says, I hope you had fun going through my old tweets. Like, dude, how is that not defensive? Andrew Neil then stipulates that he's trying to give context to Ben's ideas by pointing out what may be motivating them. And then Ben goes, well, it is wrong, but it's also right. And then insults BBC News as a news organization. Like, girl, what? Then this next thing is interesting because Ben directly stipulates that he doesn't think all Arab people are destructive. He just thinks that anyone who goes against Israel in terms of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict are destructive, and that most of those people just happen to be Palestinian. And it would make so much more sense if you just let him explain without questioning him. To which Andrew Neil responds by questioning him, and then Ben answers being like,
why are you so obsessed with me?
Specifically by saying that he is popular and no one has ever heard of Andrew Neil. Andrew Neil, respectively, refuses to take the bait, and then presses him on why his book is so inflammatory, if not for the specific purpose of stoking the flames of political division. To which Ben responds by saying Neil has no place to speak because he allegedly calls the anti-choice movement barbaric. And then Andrew Neil is like, dude, all I did was ask you a question. Why are you acting like this? Then Ben Shapiro asks him to critique the book, if he's here to critique the book, which is exactly what Andrew Neil is doing by asking him, hey, why did you say that? But in Ben's mind, this is not a valid critique. To him, it isn't a critique at all. It's a personal attack that he has to defend himself from, even though he perceives what he has said to be the abject truth. If it's so true, then what triggered this sudden shift in attitude, Ben? Then, and only then, does he say that it's a waste of time and that Andrew Neil and the BBC have bad motivations and then stomps off like a child. But according to him, that behavior isn't defensive, and if that's not defensive, then I don't know what is. Actually, scratch that. If that's not defensive, I'll eat my fucking hat. So let's pivot for a minute and talk about what a bad faith actor is. Webster's dictionary defines bad faith as a sustained form of deception which consists of entertaining or pretending to entertain one set of feelings while acting as if influenced by another. In 1943, philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre posited that bad faith consists of a person hiding the truth from themselves. He states, the one to whom the lie is told and the one who lies are one and the same person, which means that I must know the truth in my capacity as the deceiver, though the truth is hiding from me in my capacity as the one deceived. Therefore, I must know very precisely in order to hide it from myself the more carefully, and that this is not at two moments of temporality. The reason why this insight is important is because that is how one goes into a debate in bad faith. Basically, what this means is that you know the truth of a policy, idea, or topic, but you deliberately pretend that it isn't the truth, solely for the sake of diverting attention away from it. This is why I assert that all of these rules are just a guide on how to be a bad faith actor, and quite frankly, how to be a dick. His intention of asking questions is not to gain clarity, but to rip the rug out from underneath his opponent and divert their attention away from the issue at hand. His entire strategy is to come within centimeters of touching you, and when you react poorly, to say that he isn't touching you, and that you can't say that he is because you haven't clarified what the words he, touching, and you mean as terms, and then if you call him out for doing exactly that, he starts screaming and crying and shitting his pants. When it comes to pointing out contradictions, Ben Shapiro's own conduct within a debate space is a contradiction. He gets defensive, he gish-gallops, he deploys red herrings, and constantly moves goalposts and changes subjects like it's going out of style. What he demonstrates is that he has no real ability to debate anything. All he can do is get up on stage, burp in the other person's face, piss his pants, and then whine about how unfair the other person is on his oil money YouTube show. He sucks at debate. In my opinion, he sucks in general, but strictly speaking, he sucks at debate. And he sucks at debate because he's an unapologetic bad faith actor. You know how I know that? Because his video is about how to win a debate, not how to conduct yourself in a debate. All he can do to keep people from realizing that and refusing to platform him is to train people to debate the way that he does and then pretend it's normal when it's not. When people acted like Ben Shapiro do in debate rounds, they got docked points, they got yelled at by their coaches, and most importantly, they lost. But stepping back and looking at Ben in a more macro sense, he just sucks at his job in general. Primarily because most of his content on the Daily Wire consists of an appeal to disgust. The appeal to disgust, also called the appeal to emotion or argumentum ad passionis, is defined by Michael C. Labalsari of the Nizkor Project as an informal fallacy characterized by the manipulation of the recipient's emotions in order to win an argument, especially in the absence of factual evidence. This also goes hand in hand with concepts like the appeals to fear, consequences, flattery, self-pity, ridicule, spite, and the fallacy of wishful thinking. Ultimately, the goal of the use of this tactic is to convince someone solely on your ability to provoke an emotion instead of demonstrating why your argument or premise is true or false using concrete evidence. This isn't a new phenomenon, though, and Ben certainly isn't the first person to be guilty of it. Here's a short history. Going back to the age of Aristotle, in his writings titled Rhetoric from the 4th century BC, he describes persuasion rooted in the emotional response of the audience as the orator persuading by means of his hearers, when they are aroused to emotion by his speech. For the judgments we deliver are not the same when we are influenced by joy or sorrow, love or hate. Even Seneca agreed in AD 45 in his own writings De Ira, when he said, "Reason herself, to whom the reins of power have been entrusted, remains mistress only as so long as she is kept apart from the passions." In 1658, Blaise Pascal repeated this in his writing On the Art of Persuasion, when he said, "No one is ignorant that there are two avenues by which opinions are received into the soul, which are its two principal powers, the understanding and the will. The more natural is that of the understanding, for we should never consent to any but demonstrated truths. But the more common, though the one contrary to nature, is that of the will. For all men are almost led to believe not of proof but by attraction. This way is base, ignoble, and irrelevant. Everyone therefore disavows it. Each one professes to believe and even to love nothing but what he knows to be worthy of belief and love." In 1776, Scottish philosopher George Campbell disagreed slightly by saying, "Emotions are not the supplanters of reason, or even rivals in her sway. They are her handmaids, by whose ministry she is enabled to usher truth into the heart and procure it to favorable reception. As handmaids, they are liable to be seduced by sophistry in the garb of reason, and sometimes are made ignorantly to lend their aid in the introduction of falsehood." Although, I'd hazard a guess and say that Benny Shaps doesn't really give a shit about all that, and is more in line with propaganda pioneer Edward Bernays and what he said in 1928, which is, certain cases, we can effect some change in public opinion with a fair degree of accuracy, by operating a certain mechanism just as a motorist can regulate the speed of his car by manipulating the flow of gasoline. And elaborated by saying that his propagandist colleagues should target, quote, impulses, habits, and emotions, and make emotional currents work to achieve the goal of their own work. The reason why this is important to the discussion of why he's bad at debate is because all he does is get up in the morning, cash the check he gets from his oil fracking sugar daddies, and then show you clips from TikTok, YouTube, and other places on the internet and go,
"I'm Tammy Larson, and these are the breaking stories." What's up with Brenda? I mean, right?
And then expect you to assume that he's correct based on the fact that he made you feel a feeling. Therefore, he isn't really debating anything or arguing anything at all. He's just kind of sitting down at his desk and going,
"You're on the bottom row!"
I am the bottom row.
Yeah.
It's in his best interest for his audience not to think critically about anything he's saying, because if they were actually listening and tracking the flow of his arguments, they would see that he isn't actually saying anything. So he depends on the smokescreen of disgust that he can create by evoking conservative disgust at marginalized people, progressivism, and the general culture of a society rooted in white supremacy, patriarchy, and colonial imperialism in order to distract from the fact that he's got nothing going on once the smoke settles. If all you're doing is farming reactionary politics when you're allegedly supposed to be educating people from a conservative perspective, you're not really doing anything, and you shouldn't be considered as smart as you are. All in all, Ben Shapiro is just a bad faith actor masquerading as an intellectual. He's an insecure, childish man who resorts to the very tactics that he claims to oppose the minute that he faces even the smallest amount of pushback. The way he views his own position in a debate is that he and his talking points are unimpeachable, and that the only purpose of the debate is to defend yourself to him, only for him to humiliate and embarrass you to make himself feel better about the fact that he's not as smart or philosophically significant as he wants to be. Not only this, he's just overall lazy. He's like the Regina George of the extreme right wing, except instead of waiting until the very end of some kind of conflict to throw pages of the burn book all over the place and get everyone squabbling so they're distracted from him, he's doing it every single day and being paid to do it. He's just a sad excuse for a talking head, and even thinking about the concept of a conversation with him is a waste of time. Your time would be better spent watching paint dry than to conceive of a way to make him open his eyes to the truth of his behavior, because he knows exactly what he's doing. He just doesn't care. With all that being said, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for tomorrow when it'll be tomorrow. Bye.